On June 19, 1865, 155 years ago today, Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas with the news that the war was over and the enslaved were now free. This was 2.5 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which was made official on January 1, 1863. There was such a minimal number of Union troops in Texas that there was no enforcement of the new executive order. But with General Lee's surrender in April of 1865 and the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to overcome the resistance. There have been several theories as to the cause of the 2.5-year delay. One being the messenger bringing the news of freedom was murdered on his way to Texas. Another is that the information was deliberately withheld by enslavers to maintain the labor force on plantations, or that federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap their benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the emancipation. Many of the enslaved stayed to learn of a new relationship with their former masters, while others left as soon as they heard the words. Just leaving the plantations was the first act of freedom for most. For many, heading north was the best option, as they saw it as a place of true freedom, while others headed to other states where they knew their family members were. The celebration of Juneteenth became a time of praying, reassuring each other, and forgathering remaining family members, and it is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. For many decades after 1865, former slaves and descendants would make the pilgrimage back to Galveston on June 19th. Today, a few of the activities of the celebrations include rodeos, fishing, and barbecuing. The main focus of celebrations is education and self-improvement. Often, guest speakers and elders are called upon to recount events of the past. Certain foods have become popular and thus synonymous with Juneteenth celebrations, such as strawberry soda pop. The main food aspect of a Juneteenth celebration is the barbecue. Juneteenth participants feel that they could share in spirit the aromas their newly emancipated ancestors would have experienced during their ceremonies. This makes the barbecue pit the center of attention at most celebrations. Food plays such a large part of the celebrations because everyone brings their own special dish, and the emphasis on meats is due to the fact that they were not readily available at the time of the first Juneteenth celebrations. Another aspect that plays a heavy role in the celebrations is dress. It was prominent in early Juneteenth celebrations and is still taken very seriously by those who can make a direct connection to this tradition's roots. During slavery, there were laws in many areas that prohibited or even limited the dressing of the enslaved. There are accounts from the first emancipation celebrations of former slaves throwing their ragged garments in the rivers. They would then put on their clothing that they had taken from the plantations of their former masters. In the early years of Juneteenth celebrations, there was resistance expressed in the way of barring the use of public property for the festivities. Many festivals were forced to rural areas, or church grounds were often used as activity sites as well. As more African Americans became landowners, land was donated for the festivities. Reverend Jack Yates was the first to purchase land for Juneteenth celebrations, and it became what is now known as Emancipation Park in Houston, Texas. In the early 1900s, there was a decline in celebrations due to the economic and cultural forces. The emphasis on textbook and classroom education also played a factor in the decline, as textbooks listed the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery on January 1, 1863, with no mention of General Granger's arrival or the announcement on June 19th. When the Depression forced many from rural areas into the city, they found employers did not grant the day off for celebration. The 1950s and 60s brought about the Civil Rights Movement, which also brought a resurgence in Juneteenth celebrations. Student demonstrators involved in the Atlanta Civil Rights Campaign wore Juneteenth freedom buttons. Then, in 1968, those that attended the Poor People's March in Washington, D.C., returned home and organized Juneteenth celebrations where there were none. Because of this, two of the largest Juneteenth celebrations are now held in Milwaukee and Minneapolis. Al Edwards, an African-American legislator, called for Juneteenth to become an official state holiday, and on January 1st, 1980, Texas became the first state to recognize it as one. Juneteenth is recognized as a holiday or special day of observance in 47 of the 50 states now. Several institutions, such as the Smithsonian, the Henry Ford Museum, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, have begun sponsoring Juneteenth-centered activities. We have several books here in Lenski that tell the stories of the enslaved African Americans as well as Juneteenth itself. Call or go online now to reserve yours.